Before sunrise, somewhere in the highlands of Bali, a wooden gate is lifted out of a stone channel, and water that fell as rain on a volcano days earlier begins moving toward a field it has been promised to for that morning. No engineer designed this schedule, no government office enforces it. The decision belongs to a network of farmers and priests running a system that predates the country of Indonesia, predates the idea of Bali as most of the world understands it now, and has never once been advertised to a tourist. "10 miles away, at almost exactly the same hour, a swimming pool is being topped off from a well drilled 200 feet into that same ground. Nobody floating in it has heard of the gate. Nobody at the gate has ever seen the pool. The relationship between these two mornings, how completely one depends on the other, and how quietly one is running out of patience with the other, turns out to be the real story of this island. Not the beaches, not the temples photographed on the way to somewhere else. Water, and the very old question of who decides how much of it any one person is allowed to take. Bali arrives in most imaginations already finished, an image assembled long before anyone lands. Rice terraces the color of limes, temples silhouetted against the sea. A word, paradise, repeated so often that it has started to function less like a description and more like a brand name. Almost none of that image explains how the place actually works. Underneath the postcard is an operating system built centuries before the first hotel opened, and it was never really about beauty, it was about restraint. An island of steep volcanic slopes and unreliable rain figured out a very long time ago that the only way for everyone to eat was for no one to take more than an exact, agreed share of water, enforced not primarily by law, but by religion, by neighbors, by priests standing at the mouths of temples built specifically to decide who opened which gate and when. That system has a name. It is called Subak. It is one of the reasons Bali looks the way it does, and in the last few decades, it has come under more pressure than at any point in its 1,000-year history, not from drought, not from war, but from the success of the beauty it created. This is a story about water moving downhill, about the difference between an economy built on the idea of enough and one built on the idea of more, about what happens when both are asked to share the same small island, the same shrinking rivers, and increasingly the same rain. To understand any of it, the story has to go up first, toward the volcanoes.
Bali's two dominant peaks, Agung and Batur, are both active volcanoes, part of the same tectonic collision that built the entire Indonesian archipelago. Agung is the taller of the two, a near symmetrical cone, considered by Balinese Hindus to be the axis of the world, the direction every temple orients toward, the direction a traditional house is built to respect. Batur sits inside the remains of a much older, much larger volcano that collapsed on itself tens of thousands of years ago, leaving a vast caldera with a crater lake at its center, Lake Batur, beside a newer, smaller cone that has kept erupting periodically ever since. That collapsed caldera matters more than almost anything else about this island. Lake Batur, along with two smaller highland lakes, Buyan and Tumblingen, functions as Bali's water tower. Rain falling across the central highlands collects there and in the volcanic aquifers beneath them, then finds its way down through rivers and springs toward the coast, passing on the way through nearly every rice field on the island. Volcanic soil is generous. It is also short-lived on a slope, rich and loose and prone to sliding downhill in heavy rain, unless something holds it in place. Bali's answer, visible from the air across huge portions of the island, is terracing, cutting a mountainside into a staircase of flat, flooded steps. It slows water down long enough for rice to use it. It keeps soil from washing into the sea. The terraces are not decoration. They are erosion control that happens from certain angles to look like the most photographed landscape in Southeast Asia. Terracing alone doesn't solve the harder problem, which is distribution. A river only flows past so many fields before it reaches the sea, and every field along the way wants water at roughly the same weeks of the year. Left purely to self-interest, farmers highest up the mountain could simply take what they needed and leave nothing for anyone downstream. That this did not happen for over 1,000 years on an island with no shortage of self-interest is the actual engineering achievement. And it wasn't achieved with force. It was achieved with Subak.
A Subak is a self-governing association of farmers who share a single irrigation source, a canal, a weir, a tunnel cut through volcanic rock. Membership isn't really optional if a farmer's land sits inside the system. It comes with the field. Each Subak elects its own leadership, sets its own planting schedule, resolves its own disputes, maintains its own stretch of canal, and each one answers in turn to a temple. The earliest confirmed written reference to Subak-style water sharing on Bali dates to the 9th century in stone inscriptions describing arrangements tied to religious donations. Some scholars believe the practice is older still, connected to Bali's most important temple complex, Visakhi, on the southern slopes of Mount Agung. What's certain is that by the time European ships began charting the archipelago, the system was already old, already intricate, and already central to how Balinese society organized itself. Not an agricultural technique with spiritual decoration on top, but a religious structure that happened to grow rice.
At the top of the whole arrangement, historically, sits a temple most visitors never hear about, Pura Ulun Danu Batur, built on the caldera's rim overlooking the lake, dedicated to the goddess believed to govern its waters. For centuries, the temple's high priest held real practical authority, not symbolic, actual, over the ritual calendar that determined when water would be released to Subak's downstream, which crops could be planted when, and how conflicts over water would be settled. A goddess and a planting calendar doing the job a reservoir authority or a ministry of agriculture might do somewhere else. By most measures, it worked for centuries longer than most secular irrigation bureaucracies have managed to survive anywhere on Earth. None of it ran on generosity alone. Subak enforces balance the way most durable systems do, with real, felt consequences for breaking it. A farmer who diverted more than his allotted share wasn't simply inconveniencing a neighbor. In the traditional framework, he was disrupting a relationship with the divine that the entire community depended on. And the response could include fines, forced labor repairing the very channels he'd exploited, or social consequences that mattered enormously in a small, interdependent village. Balance here was never a mood, it was a rule with teeth, wrapped in a story about gods. The philosophy underneath it all, Tri Hita Karana, the three causes of well-being, grew out of some 2,000 years of cultural and religious exchange between Bali and India, absorbing and reshaping Hindu cosmology into something distinctly Balinese, a belief that a good life depends on three relationships kept simultaneously in balance, with the divine, with other people, and with the natural world.
Neglect any one of the three, the philosophy holds, and the other two eventually suffer as well. It shows up in the layout of a traditional Balinese house, oriented around a family temple. It shows up in the placement of village boundaries and shrines. And it shows up most visibly in a landscape of terraced rice fields, fed by a network of temples whose only purpose is making sure nobody upstream forgets that somebody else lives downstream. Water in this framework isn't simply a resource to manage. It moves through the mountain, the temple, the field, the farmer, and back into the river, understood the whole way as something more than chemistry. At Tirta Ampul, a temple built around a natural spring near the town of Tampak Siring, worshippers still queue in the pools each morning to move spout by spout through a purification ritual called melukat, dipping beneath the water at a specific sequence of stone fountains to wash away what needs washing away, spiritually as much as physically. The spring has been in continuous ritual use since roughly the 9th century. It has never stopped being a working part of the water system, even as it has become, over the last 2 decades, something else as well. One of the most visited religious sites on the island, its courtyards now regularly filled with not farmers timing a harvest, but with travelers in rented sarongs, waiting their turn for a photograph.
Two of the clearest places to see the older system still functioning are Jatiluwi in the highlands of Tabanan Regency and Tagalalong, closer to Ubud, terraced valleys where Subak managed rice grows in the same staggered water-fed steppes it has for centuries, and where farmers still plant, flood, and harvest on a schedule negotiated collectively, Subak by Subak, to avoid every field needing the same water at the same moment. Some grow traditional Balinese rice varieties that take longer to mature and yield less per harvest than the faster hybrids grown elsewhere in Indonesia, a choice with as much to do with ritual calendars and soil health as with taste, and one that puts these farmers at a real economic disadvantage against cheaper grain shipped in from other islands entirely. It was never an easy way to make a living. Subsistence rice farming inside a religious cooperative, competing against cheaper grain from elsewhere. What kept it viable for centuries wasn't profit margin. It was the fact that there was rarely a better alternative use for steep, terraced, temple-governed land. That, more than anything else about to happen in this story, is the detail worth holding on to. Because a place that is simultaneously a functioning piece of sacred infrastructure and a stop on a sightseeing itinerary doesn't happen by accident. It took a specific chain of events, starting almost exactly a century ago, to turn an island most of the world had never heard of into a name attached to the word paradise, and the people who set that chain in motion were not Balinese at all. In the early 1920s, a regular steamship line began connecting Dutch colonial ports in Java to a small harbor in northern Bali, built for trade, not tourism. The ships carried officials and cargo. What they carried back to Europe, almost by accident, were stories. A German doctor stationed briefly on the island, Gregor Kraus, published a book of photographs in 1920 that startled European audiences. Temple ceremonies, cremation processions, dancers, rice terraces, an entire visual world that read to audiences used to colonial photographs of hardship and conquest as something closer to unguarded, working beauty. The book found its way to a young German painter named Walter Spies, who arrived in Bali later that decade, settled in Ubud, and stayed for most of the rest of his life. He was joined over the following years by the Dutch painter Rudolf Bonnet, the Mexican artist and writer Miguel Covarrubias, and a rotating circle of composers, anthropologists, and travelers pulled in by word of mouth and increasingly by print. These were not typical visitors. Spies lived on the island for roughly the last 15 years of his life, learned the language, studied the music, and worked with the Balinese dancer and choreographer Yen Limbach to adapt a trance-based temple chant into a new theatrical form for a German-produced film in the early 1930s, a piece that would travel the world afterward under the name Kechak, now one of the most recognizable performances on the island, despite being at most a century old. Covarrubias spent years researching the island's culture, publishing an influential account titled Island of Bali in 1937. Their letters, paintings, and photographs went back to Europe and North America and did something no marketing department had planned. They built a reputation. An American journalist who visited in the late 1920s, Hickman Powell, titled his trip account The Last Paradise. The label stuck, in one form or another, for the rest of the century. It is worth pausing on what exactly was being described as paradise. Not idleness, not an absence of structure. What these visitors were responding to, whether or not they had the vocabulary for it, was a society whose daily rhythm was saturated with intention. Ceremony timed to planting, architecture oriented to cosmology, a culture visibly organized around something larger than individual convenience. They read it as innocence or magic or an escape from Western modernity. Underneath, it was a highly disciplined system of shared obligation. The paradise story that left Bali in the 1920s and 30s was in that sense already a slight mistranslation, a beautiful surface described by outsiders who mostly never asked what was holding it up. Tourism in this first era stayed small by necessity. A trip from Europe took the better part of 6 weeks by sea. A few hundred travelers a year became a few thousand by the end of the 1930s, enough to justify Bali's first real hotel, built in Denpasar in 1928, but nowhere near enough to reshape the island's economy. War and Indonesian independence interrupted almost all of it through the 1940s and into the 1950s. For roughly a generation, Bali went back to being, from the outside, a name in old travel writing rather than a place people actually planned to visit. What restarted the story in the 60s and 70s wasn't a myth, it was a wave, literally.
Surfers began arriving in numbers large enough to matter, drawn by breaks at Kuta in Uluwatu that were, at the time, essentially unknown outside a small circuit of travelers crossing Asia and the Pacific by word of mouth. Backpackers followed, then hostels, then simple guest houses run out of family compounds. The Bali Beach Hotel, for years the island's largest, opened on the eastern shore in the mid-1960s and became a template for what came next. Not artists settling in for years, but visitors arriving for 2 weeks and leaving foreign currency behind. An expanded international airport dramatically widened the island's reach, and by the late 1970s and through the 1980s, Bali had shifted from a destination reached by the determined few to one reachable for the first time by direct flight in package tour. Sanur and Nusa Dua were developed as planned resort zones. From there, the growth curve simply kept climbing, decade after decade, interrupted only by crises, a pair of terrorist bombings in the early 2000s that devastated tourism for a period, a global pandemic 2 decades later that emptied the island almost entirely for the better part of 2 years. Each time, the recovery came back stronger and faster than the disruption. By 2025, Bali recorded close to 7 million international arrivals in a single year, by some counts over 7 million, the highest total on record, surpassing every year before the pandemic. Add domestic Indonesian travelers, and the island logged more than 16 million visits in 12 months, on an island with a resident population a little over 4 million. More than 60,000 visitors on an average day arrive somewhere that 4.5 million people already call home.
That scale doesn't sit on the landscape evenly. It concentrates in Kuta, Seminyak, Canggu, Ubud, the southern peninsula around Uluwatu and Nusa Dua, in a relatively narrow band of the island that a generation ago looked mostly like the rest of it: rice paddy, coconut grove, fishing village. Canggu, in particular, has become something close to a case study in how fast this kind of change can move. Within roughly 2 decades, an area known mainly for surf breaks and working rice fields filled in with villas, co-working spaces, imported coffee culture, and short-term rental listings, built largely on land that used to be, and in patches still technically is, registered agricultural Subak territory. None of that conversion happens by force. It happens field by field, through ordinary, individually rational decisions. A farming family holding land inside a productive Subak, watching rice prices stay flat while nearby land values climb into the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars per plot, is being asked to weigh a 1,000-year-old obligation to their neighbors and their temple against a number that could change their children's lives. Multiply that decision across tens of thousands of families over several decades, and the aggregate result is a measurable, ongoing loss of productive rice land, tracked by researchers and government reports at anywhere from several hundred to well over 1,000 acres a year through the much of the 2010s and into the 2020s. A slow erosion of exactly the terraced landscape that made the island look like something worth visiting in the first place. And the land isn't the only thing being converted. So is the water underneath it. A hotel room, a private pool villa, a spa, a landscaped garden that has to stay green through a 6-month dry season draw water at a rate that has almost nothing in common with a rice paddy's seasonal, scheduled needs. Multiple independent studies over the past decade have arrived at a strikingly consistent estimate. Tourism now accounts for something close to 2/3 of all groundwater extracted on the island, even though the sector occupies a small fraction of its land and population. Some of that draw runs through the island's public utility. A great deal of it doesn't, pulled instead through privately drilled wells, many unregistered, some deliberately underreported, according to people in the industry who've spoken about it anonymously, to reduce local water taxes. As shallow wells run dry or turn brackish, the response across the tourism zone has been to drill deeper, chasing water further underground, competing well against well for the same shrinking reserve, with almost none of the coordination that governs the irrigation channels a few miles inland. It is, in a sense, the oldest problem on the island playing out again. Too many people wanting water from the same limited source. Except this time, one side of the arrangement was never built to hear the word enough. None of this arrived as an invasion. That's worth being precise about, because it would be easy and inaccurate to tell this as a story of an innocent island overrun by outside money. Balinese families own the hotels, run the villas, lease the land, drive the tour vans, staff the resorts, and sit on the village councils negotiating zoning. Tourism generates something close to 80% of the island's economy by some estimates, and for hundreds of thousands of Balinese households, it is not a threat to a traditional way of life. It is the reason a son or daughter didn't have to leave the island to find work. The contradiction here isn't between good Balinese people and bad foreign development. It's closer to a system running two different sets of rules on the same shrinking amount of water at the same time, with no shared referee. Subak was built from the ground up around the idea that water has to be shared, monitored, and rationed by people who will still be neighbors next season. Every gate, every schedule, every temple ritual exists to answer one question: how much is fair? And to make that answer stick, socially, over a very long time. The wells drilled to fill a swimming pool or wash 1,000 hotel towels a day answer a different question entirely. How much is available right now to whoever can afford to drill deep enough to reach it? There is no temple in that second system, no shared calendar, no priest whose job is to say, on behalf of everyone downstream, that's enough for today. The gap between those two systems is now visible in the water table itself. Along Bali's southern coast, Kuta, Sanur, the dense resort strip running down the Bukit Peninsula, heavy groundwater pumping has pulled water levels down far enough, fast enough, that seawater has started moving in to replace what's been removed. A process that once underway in a coastal aquifer is extraordinarily difficult to reverse. Researchers tracking the island's rivers have found that roughly 2/3 of them no longer flow the way they once did, many running dry for months at a stretch. Buyan, the island's largest freshwater lake, has measurably dropped over the past 2 decades. Multiple independent studies, using different methods across different years, keep arriving at some version of the same estimate. Tourism, occupying a small fraction of the island's land, now accounts for roughly 2/3 of everything drawn from the ground. None of that stayed abstract for long. In the fall of 2025, sustained heavy rain overwhelmed drainage systems across large parts of Bali, triggering flooding that killed at least 18 people and destroyed or damaged thousands of homes, shops, and villas. The immediate cause was rainfall. The reason the rainfall turned catastrophic was something else. Investigators and officials pointed to a landscape that had lost much of its natural capacity to absorb water. Rice terraces and forest converted over decades into concrete, asphalt, and rooftops that shed rain instead of holding it. Government figures released in the aftermath showed that of roughly 45,000 hectares of mapped watershed across the island, only about 1,500 still had meaningful tree cover, a small fraction of what hydrologists consider necessary for a landscape to safely absorb monsoon rainfall. Land that used to hold water had become, across large stretches, land that only sheds it, and the difference showed up within hours as floodwater moving through bedrooms and shop fronts. The response was swift and familiar. Bali's governor announced a halt to new hotel, villa, and commercial construction on agricultural land and in water catchment areas, describing it as a necessary step to stop the conversion of farmland that his own government's assessment linked directly to the flooding. A formal decree followed months later, explicitly protecting rice fields designated for food production from further conversion to tourism use. It was not the first time a moratorium like this had been proposed. Versions of it had been floated, narrowed, delayed, and quietly abandoned in years prior as investment pressure and local economic interests pushed back.
Whether this version holds, expands, or is eventually negotiated away too, is, as of this telling, still an open question. One more chapter in a policy argument that has been running in one form or another for the better part of 2 decades. Even the island's spiritual relationship with water hasn't been immune to the forces reshaping everything else. At Tirta Impul, the roughly 1,000-year-old spring where Balinese Hindus have queued for morning purification for generations, the same pools now regularly fill with travelers renting ceremonial sarongs for an hour-long version of Malukat sold as an experience, sincere for some, performative for others, not always easy from the outside to tell apart. Local worshippers still come. The ritual hasn't stopped meaning what it meant, but the temple that once quietly helped synchronize a farming calendar for the region around it now runs on a second clock too, measured in tour buses and how early in the morning someone has to arrive to have the water mostly to themselves.
And yet, this is the detail that keeps the story from resolving into a simple morality tale. Tourism has also become one of the only economic forces on the island powerful enough to make preserving a rice terrace worth more than selling it. Yati Lui and the wider Subak landscape around it earned UNESCO recognition, partly because its scenic, working beauty had already become valuable to outside visitors. And that recognition, along with the entrance fees and guiding income that came with it, now helps some local Subaks justify staying in rice production, rather than converting. Tagalalong's terraces, crowded with visitors most mornings, generate parking and photo spot income that in some cases subsidizes the very farming that keeps them looking the way tourists came to see them. Tourism is draining the island's water table with one hand, and in a narrow but real set of cases, propping up its most water-disciplined landscapes with the other. Both things are true. Neither cancels the other out. The pressure shows up most personally at the smallest scale. A family renting out a handful of guest rooms on land that has belonged to them for generations doesn't experience the water crisis as a statistic. It experiences it as a well that used to reach water at 20 meters and now has to go down 60, and a growing awareness that the resort next door, with its infinity pool and daily linen service, has wells going twice that deep. Compete for the same water table long enough at that kind of asymmetry, and a smaller operator either drills deeper too, buys trucked-in water at a premium, or eventually sells the land to someone who can. None of those choices require a villain. They are simply what happens when a resource gets divided by ability to pay, rather than by an agreed communal share. Precisely the outcome Subak was built centuries ago to prevent within its own channels, and precisely the outcome now unfolding everywhere Subak doesn't reach. Some of the response to that has come from outside government entirely. Local and international organizations have spent recent years building networks of small recharge wells across parts of the island, simple systems that redirect wet season rainfall underground instead of letting it run straight to the sea, aiming to slow the decline of aquifers one village at a time. Some Subak associations, meanwhile, have started doing something their founders never had to consider: negotiating directly with hotels and developers building near their catchments, trading access or cooperation for contributions to canal maintenance, or, in a few cases, formal water-sharing arrangements that extend the old logic of the temple system to a neighbor who isn't a rice farmer at all. It is a strange kind of expansion for a 1,000-year-old institution, inviting the very industry pulling water out of the ground to become, in a limited sense, a member too, bound by at least a version of the same obligation to leave enough for whoever's next in line. Whether that kind of accommodation can scale fast enough to matter is genuinely unknown. Tourism numbers keep climbing. The rain keeps arriving in the same feast and famine pattern it always has, only now falling on a landscape with less capacity to hold it. And the two systems, one built on enough, one built on more, keep drawing from the same mountain.
Go back for a moment to that gate and that pool. The gate opens because a decision was made collectively a very long time ago that water belongs first to the community that depends on it, portioned out by need and by turn, and that anyone tempted to take more than their share answers not just to a neighbor, but to something larger than either of them. The pool fills because a well was drilled deep enough to reach water that, increasingly, nothing is asking anyone to share. Both draw from the same mountain. Only one of them was ever designed to ask whether there's enough to go around. That, in the end, is what the postcard leaves out. Bali's beauty was never simply given by geography, a lucky volcano, a generous climate, a coastline that photographs well at sunset. It was built, terrace by terrace, temple by temple, negotiation by negotiation, by a society that organized an enormous amount of its collective effort around the discipline of taking only enough. The rice fields that made the island famous aren't a natural feature. They are the visible residue of 1,000 years of people agreeing and re-agreeing on limits. Paradise, as the word got used by the artists and writers who exported the idea a century ago, was always a slight misreading, mistaking the result for the cause, admiring the view without asking what kind of restraint had made it possible. The industry that grew out of that misreading runs on a different premise almost by definition. Growth is the metric reported each year. More arrivals, more rooms, a new direct flight, a record practically every season. There is no institutional mechanism inside global tourism like there has always been inside a Subak, whose entire job is to stand at the gate and ask whether this is already enough. That absence isn't a flaw introduced by any single hotel chain or any single traveler. It's closer to a structural feature of an industry built to keep expanding into whatever room a destination has left. And Bali, for most of a century, kept finding room. What the floods of 2025 demonstrated in the plainest possible terms is that the room has limits that don't negotiate. Water finds the fastest way down a slope, whether or not there's a rice terrace or a forest there to slow it. A watershed either has enough vegetation to absorb a monsoon or it doesn't, regardless of how many arrivals a tourism office is hoping to report that quarter. The old philosophy wasn't superstition dressed up as farming advice. It was a working, tested description of how much a landscape like this one can actually hold before it stops holding anything at all. Verified, in the end, not by a temple, but by an insurance claim and a body count. There's a version of this story that ends with blame. Hold tourism responsible. Hold government responsible. Hold the individual traveler responsible for the water in their pool. It would be satisfying, and it would also miss what the Subak system actually teaches, which isn't about blame at all. It's about design. 1,000 years of Balinese water management succeeded because Balinese farmers were more virtuous than anyone else. It succeeded because someone built a structure, a temple, a calendar, a shared consequence that made taking only your share the easiest, least costly choice available, generation after generation. Virtue was never really the mechanism. Design was.
Nothing resembling that design currently resembles the well beneath the hotel, or the flight path bringing another few 100,000 visitors into Nangarai this month, or a search bar recommending Canggu to someone scrolling a screen on the other side of the world, entirely unaware that the search itself is, in some very small way, a request for water from a mountain they've never seen. Building something like that design, at the scale tourism now operates on, may be the actual unfinished work of this story. Not a return to the past, which isn't coming back, but an extension of an old idea into a system that has never had to learn it. That beauty this specific, produced by restraint this deliberate, doesn't renew itself automatically just because people keep showing up to look at it. None of this resolves neatly, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The moratorium announced after the floods may hold, may expand, or may quietly soften the way earlier versions did once the immediate shock faded and land values reasserted themselves. Tourism arrivals kept climbing through the very year the island's government was drafting new rules to slow the industry down, a fact that says something uncomfortable about how much appetite currently exists on either side of the transaction to actually stop. Some Subaks are finding new footing, folding tourism income into their survival rather than losing to it. Others are simply disappearing, one converted field at a time, as the arithmetic of rice against villas keeps tilting the direction it has for 20 years. What's changed, mostly, is that the question can no longer be avoided by looking away from it. For most of the last 100 years, it was possible to visit Bali, photograph its rice terraces, wade into its holy springs, and leave without ever noticing the system running underneath, the gates, the schedules, the priests deciding whose turn it was. That system now shows up in headlines instead of irrigation manuals, in flood warnings, in dry wells, in a governor's decree with a rice field's name in the fine print. The island that spent 1,000 years perfecting the art of taking only enough is being asked all at once by an industry with no equivalent instinct exactly how much more it has left to give. Nobody yet knows the answer. What's clear is that the island itself has started answering back.
Drive between Ubud and the coast today, on almost any route, and the whole contradiction sits side by side without needing any narration at all. A Subak temple, small and stone and centuries old, standing at the corner of a field that still floods green every planting season. 50 meters past it, a villa under construction, rebar exposed, a delivery truck idling where a rice paddy used to drain toward the same canal the temple was built to bless. Somewhere within earshot of both, most afternoons, a family carries a small offering of flowers and rice out to a shrine at the edge of their own compound, not for a special occasion, just an ordinary Tuesday. The uninterrupted maintenance of a relationship between people, land, and whatever they understand to be watching over both. Nobody involved seems to find any of this contradictory. It is simply what the island looks like right now, mid-sentence. A very old story and a very new one occupying the same 100 meters of road. High on the slopes of Batur, long before any of this, before the airport, before Kuda's first surfboard, before a German painter ever stepped off a steamship and reached for his sketchbook, rain has always done the same simple thing. It falls on a crater lake, seeps into volcanic rock, and starts moving, patiently, toward the sea. It does not know about hotels. It does not know about exchange rates, or the difference between a Subak in a swimming pool. It only knows downhill. What people built along that path is the history of this island in miniature: a temple at the source, a gate at every fork, a field waiting its turn, a farmer who agreed, long before he was born into the arrangement, to take his share and stop. For most of 1,000 years, that agreement held quietly enough that almost nobody watching the view from a beachfront lounge chair ever needed to know it existed.
It is not quiet anymore. It shows up now in a governor's decree, in a flood line marked on a shop wall, in a well drilled twice as deep as it was 10 years ago, in a purification pool crowded at 7 in the morning, people trying to beat the tour buses to a ritual that used to belong only to the morning itself. The island sold to the world as an escape from modern life turns out to be one of the clearest places on Earth to watch modern life's basic arithmetic play out. How much can be taken before there's nothing left to share? And who, if anyone, is willing to be the one who says stop? Somewhere on that same mountain, tomorrow before sunrise, a gate will lift again. It has lifted more mornings than anyone can count, on a schedule older than the idea of Indonesia, older than the idea of paradise, older than any resort now drawing from the same slope. Whether it keeps lifting 100 years from now has very little to do with the rain, which will keep falling on Batur and Agung exactly as it always has. It has everything to do with whether anyone arriving next for a weekend, for a wedding, for a slower life logged in from a laptop by the pool, ever bothers to ask where the water in front of them actually came from, and whether there was once, and might still be, a gate.